Hello, and welcome to another Bionicle review. Today we're looking at Makuta, the big bad of the Bionicle universe. Standing opposite his brother, the great spirit Mata Nui, Makuta represents all that is bad in the world: corruption, darkness, and destruction. He's responsible for most of the problems faced by the Toa and Matoran, not least the so-called Great Cataclysm, a devastating series of events that included the fall of Mata Nui, all brought about by his plot to overthrow his brother. So, the set we're looking at today is 8593, which hit shelves in 2003 as part of the Mask of Light wave to tie in with the movie, along with Takanuva, the Rakshi, and some of the rebuilt Matoran characters. It was the first version of Makuta to be released, and honestly, back then, a number of people had mixed feelings about LEGO's decision to release this particular character in plastic form. Sure, he'd been in the story from the start, but intentionally kept off screen, always there but rarely seen, and something about that just felt right for such a big villain. The decision to keep him away from the cameras wasn't taken lightly either. Alistair Swinnerton, the original co-writer of the Lore Bible, has said several times that Makuta was never intended to have a physical form. Instead, he was meant to be analogous to the old gods of Lovecraftian mythos, a force beyond comprehension, a concept even, something intangible that you could fight against but never truly defeat. Instead of a body, he had an army of infected Rahi under his control, each acting as an extension of his will, and for more focused espionage, he had his followers, the mysterious Cult of Makuta, had that particular story thread not been dropped. Even when the heroes faced him directly at the end of the first year, it was more of an abstract battle, with Makuta first revealing himself as a Matoran to taunt the Toa before shapeshifting into a swirling cloud of evil. He had no true form, no clear backstory, and in many ways that made him a lot scarier, because when things are left mysterious and undefined like that, your imagination is free to fill in the gaps, and nothing can scare you quite as effectively as your own imagination. Anyway, I digress. The movie needed a villain, so for better or for worse, here's Makuta. Now, the keen-eyed among you will immediately notice that this version of Makuta is quite distinct from his movie appearance, where he not only has a different colour scheme, but he's built differently too. The reason for this odd little discrepancy is that the movie version was based on an early prototype, which was actually put up for sale a few years back, but that's a story for another video. This Makuta is a mix of older Technic parts and newer Bionicle pieces, mostly in red and gunmetal, with a few splashes of black and silver thrown in to give him a unique and appropriately sinister appearance. He's got plenty of Rakshi pieces, including their back armour in gunmetal, some Toa armour, again in gunmetal, and even some Borak headpieces to help form his feet. His hands are recoloured Avoki masks, which are exclusive in this particular shade of silver, and that staff blade was new for 2003 too, although it's shared with his rival Takanuva. As for his size, well, he's obviously much larger than his previous Tohunga form, and he's a fair bit larger than the Toa too, but he's not quite as large as he appears in the movie. In fact, his height is a little underwhelming, especially compared to the Exo Toa, a similarly sized but canonically much less important set that came out less than a year beforehand. But Makuta does score some points back in the articulation department, especially by 2003 standards, with articulation in his shoulders, elbows and wrists. Oh, but don't flex the arms too much, there's a slight flaw in the design, where turning the joint too far will cause the sharp corners of those Rakshi limbs to rub against the soft plastic armour. So, if you were, or still are, the kind of person who plays with their toys, which is a controversial take, I know, be careful or you might end up doing some damage. For the rest of the articulation, there are ratchet joints in the hips, but just like the Exo Toa, there's nothing in the knees or ankles. Around the back is a knob that's connected to a cleverly integrated Rakshi torso, which powers Makuta's attack action. Twist the knob, and his torso swings from side to side. Although it's just the same mechanism that the Rakshi use, Makuta's extra size and bulk put some real power behind the movement, meaning he really packs a punch in combat. And speaking of Rakshi, here's Makuta next to one of his minions. He scales up nicely, taller and bulkier, despite using many of the same pieces. And I'm not sure if it's an intended gimmick or just a fun little bonus, but all the parts reused gives Makuta the ability to store Kraahkan too. He doesn't come with any, but in the movie he does kind of rip them out of himself, so if you want slugs leaking out of your Makuta, the option is there. Next up, his mask. A Bionicle set just wouldn't be a Bionicle set without one, and Makuta's facial adornment of choice is the Kraahkan, the Mask of Shadows. It gives him the ability to control darkness and raise fear and anger in others. The mask is a very unique design, able to take two different forms to suit Makuta's shapeshifting needs. The first form is this sleek, almost alien-looking profile, then with a quick twist, it takes on a more traditional, upright shape. Although, much like Makuta himself, neither option really matches the version from the movies. But movie accuracy aside, the Kraahkan is still a very important mask in the storyline, which means it's in a number of different releases over the years. Alongside the regular one, a so-called movie version of the mask came with Takutanuva, a repackaged combiner set that contained both Makuta and Takanuva. The redesigned Kraahkan was the only exclusive part in the set, and despite being sold as a more movie-accurate version of the mask, the design still only bears a passing resemblance to the animation model. Next up, a gold version of the mask was released in 2005 as part of the Tower of Toa set. Since LEGO was in the process of changing production colours at the time, the Tower of Toa Kraahkan can be found in two different shades of gold. A more common dark gold, which this one is, or a much rarer pearl gold. A running change was also made to the mould at some point prior to the release of this version, which resulted in 2 of the original 6 faceplate holes being filled in. A few years later, another version of the Kraahkan appeared in set 8953 Makuta Icarax. This version of the mask is once again black, since it's canonically the same mask that the original Makuta wore, but it continues to use the updated 4-hole design. And for completeness' sake, set 10202 Ultimate Duma hit shelves with an exclusive piece that is generally accepted to be the Kraahkan as well. The set itself doesn't name it as the Kraahkan, instead referring to the piece as the Mask of Ultimate Power, although that might have been a deliberate move to avoid spoiling the Legends of Mata Nui movie, because, spoilers, Turaga Duma is Makuta in disguise. But Kraahkan or not, this piece isn't really a true mask, since it's designed specifically to slot onto Ultimate Duma's head using a pair of axles, and as a result isn't compatible with any of the regular mask connections. Anyway, that's all of his masks. Now to look at his combiner builds. I mentioned one of them earlier, Takutanuva, which is built from Makuta and Takanuva. These 2 sworn enemies might seem like an unlikely pairing, but it's canon to the first movie, where the 2 characters fall into liquid protodermis and emerge as a single being, an entity of both dark and light. The model doesn't quite manage to capture the essence of the version we see on screen, but that's hardly going to come as a surprise at this point. Most of Takutanuva's parts are borrowed from Makuta, with a scattering of Takanuva's pieces thrown in, and even some bits of Takanuva's ride, the Asanui, although I'm not sure how they got in there. Perhaps a more accurate name for this set would be the Takasakuta Nuvinui. Try saying that 10 times as fast. Anyway, he's not much taller than the original Makuta, but he is a lot bulkier, and he's got a much larger weapon too. He also gains a pair of extendable blades on his back, and a new arm swinging action feature, although the sheer weight of his arms makes it difficult to operate. His armour is now mostly silver instead of the original gunmetal, which is presumably a reflection of the combined dark and light elements of the 2 characters. And if you're feeling creative, you can go even further towards the light by adding some gold armour, and including that gold Kraken from the Tower of Toa. Very dapper. And because Makuta is such a sneaky little shapeshifter, he also has a second combiner model, which you can create using Jala and Gukko, and Takua and Puku. There's no name given in the instructions, although the old LEGO Shop at Home webpage named it Makuta Nui, a form that Makuta takes to strike fear into his enemies. It was also later referred to as an ash bear, so I'm not sure which is more correct, although I guess you could argue that Makuta has assumed the form of an ash bear to terrify the good people of Mata Nui. Anyway, it's a bit of an odd build, as combiners often are, with a strange colour scheme and asymmetrical limbs. He's got big chomping jaws, which you can move by squeezing his chest, ratchet joints in his legs, and a similar action feature to Makuta, although now it's just the arms that move and not the whole upper torso. The build process doesn't require any parts from either of the Matoran characters, so Jala and Takua both managed to escape relatively unscathed. Although now they have to face this monstrosity without their trusty Rahi, so that might not be such a good thing after all. The combiner does leave Makuta's old weapon mostly intact though, so maybe they can use that against him. Anyway, if you ever have a go at constructing Makuta Nui for yourself, the instructions have you build his hand in a way that locks the thumb in a very awkward position. I'm not sure if it's an error or just a quirk of the limited parts pool, but it's easy to fix. You just need to switch one of the long pins for a short one, and you get full posability, which I'd recommend doing since it lets him grab hold of things and generally look a bit more menacing on display. And as is tradition for these reviews, here's one last build with an alternate colour scheme. I've switched out as many black and gunmetal pieces as possible, replacing them with white and silver. Could this be a good guy version from a different timeline? Anyway, that's just about it for the 2003 Makuta set. It's definitely a good one, but perhaps a little bit less than this Master of Evil deserved. In fact, for such an important character, his legacy in plastic form is, honestly, pretty lacking. For the entire run of the Bionicle theme, set 8593 remained the one and only release of Makuta to depict him as, well, as himself. Not counting the Takutanuva repack, all his other set appearances are just existing characters that he either possessed or impersonated, like Turaga Duma here. Now, that might not seem especially unfair, but if you only discovered Bionicle after the 2003 wave left shelves, you'd missed your one and only chance to get a quote-unquote real Makuta. Which, again, might not seem especially unfair, but LEGO then continued to feature this version of Makuta in the movie sequels, without a corresponding set in stores. Weird, right? For comparison, just look at Tahu, who's got 8 different models as of this video, and probably more on the way. Even the 2015 reboot of Bionicle was cancelled before the planned Makuta set could make it to retail. It's almost like LEGO had some kind of secret agenda against the character. And the indignity wasn't limited to a lack of dedicated sets either. In 2003, 2 years after he was introduced, he was stripped of his original element, Destruction, and given the new element, Shadow. And sure, Shadow works in the context of the movie, where he stands in contrast with the Toa of Light. But with OG Mata Nui representing life and creation, Makuta being the spirit of destruction was the perfect juxtaposition for these two brothers. It worked on a more meta level too, with the cycle of creation followed by destruction being the natural play pattern for a construction toy like LEGO. But the biggest blow came when the Brotherhood of Makuta was introduced. Not to be confused with the cancelled Cult of Makuta story arc, the Brotherhood of Makuta saw OG Makuta rechristened as Teridax, and his original name retconned to be the name of his species instead. Yes, at one point there was a whole bunch of these guys running around in the Bionicle universe. And honestly, that kind of ruins much of what made the original so special and unique. He's no longer the Makuta, ultimate evil, spirit of destruction, brother and equal of the great spirit Mata Nui. Nope, he's just some evil dude from a race of other evil dudes. Nothing against the 2008 Makuta sets, of course. They're creatively designed and suitably creepy. I just can't help feeling sorry for the original. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this review, and as ever, I love hearing your own thoughts and stories, so drop us a like, leave us a comment, and remember, if you ever feel as though life is treating you a bit unfairly, spare a thought for Makuta, Bionicle's terrifying strategic mastermind, who, just that once, had the bright idea to gamble the fate of the entire universe on a game of robot hockey, and then got beaten by a door. Oops. Ta-ta!